Alright folks, we've finally made it to the video that everything has been building up towards. We've looked at the early days of BioWare Montreal's formation, their first real project developing the Mass Effect V Omega DLC, and lastly a detailed look at the development timeline of Mass Effect Andromeda. Now, armed with all of this knowledge, we can finally begin to discuss and analyze all of the problems associated with Mass Effect Andromeda. Why was the game, under the banner of such a beloved developer, so poorly received by fans and critics alike? Honestly, this is a large question to answer because it involves nearly every aspect of Mass Effect Andromeda. While the initial press and internet forums were quick to latch on to the wonky animation work and technical glitches found in Andromeda, this cannot be the real reason behind Andromeda's poor reception. No, instead, much like Jar Jar Binks in the Star Wars prequels, the animations were a hilarious low-hanging fruit from which to attack Andromeda. However, they are not the real reason the game was so ill-received. There are many AAA open-world games and RPGs with bad animations. Hell, they're pretty much a staple of Bethesda RPGs. Yet, those games are routinely praised, reviewed well, and sell in the tens of millions. No, the problems with Andromeda run much deeper, and thus it's going to take a while for me to carefully dissect and examine for you all the faults found in Andromeda, culminating in what was a lackluster sequel to a beloved series. That said, this won't be a pure barrage of hatred. I will point out those areas where Mass Effect Andromeda is actually extremely good at, and those parts of the game that work really well. It should also be noted that despite all the hate, I don't think anyone can seriously state that Mass Effect Andromeda is a bad game. It's certainly disappointing coming from the original series or comparing it to contemporary AAA RPGs, but even most reviewers admit it's a decent game. Average. But it's that averageness that can often be so damning in the AAA space, especially from a series that was once considered the pinnacle of sci-fi and role-playing. So without further prefacing, let's try and figure out where Andromeda went wrong. In this third part, I'm going to mainly focus on the story failings of Mass Effect Andromeda, mainly from the perspective of the plot and the characters. As a result, this is going to be a longer video than usual as I go through the entire plot of Mass Effect Andromeda. But Andromeda's plot failings are not the only thing wrong with its narrative. I plan to focus on its more thematic failings on a more higher level in my next video. In any case, let's dive in. To begin with, I find it hard to figure out just where to begin critiquing Mass Effect Andromeda. There really is an abundance of ways in which to tackle the subject. But rather than immediately going into breaking down why something like the story or characters don't work, I thought I'd start by detailing a troubling aspect I noticed about Mass Effect Andromeda even before it came out. You see, in the lead up to the release of Andromeda, there was one thing I kept hearing from everyone involved in the project, which was they wanted to recapture the feeling of Mass Effect 1. Now this by itself doesn't sound too troubling, but just notice the frequency of Mass Effect 1 is brought up in those interviews and pre-release footage.
But the more we discussed it, the more ME1 kept coming back as the spiritual North Star for Andromeda. This idea of exploring planets, this idea of being a new character with a new cast of characters in the game. Everything around that experience resonated with what we're trying to do in Andromeda. While the expression of the gameplay and some of the storytelling is more advanced than it was in Mass Effect 1, Mass Effect 1 kept being that game we would go back to and say, what were we trying to do with Mass Effect 1 that we couldn't do because there was limitations or because we didn't have time or because of whatever. And so we would build those things into Andromeda.
You allow the player to explore a lot of these uncharted worlds, these dangerous planets, kind of like you did in Mass Effect 1, but with a rich narrative storytelling built into those planets.
The other thing is that they should be excited that, you know, this is going to feel like, in many ways, Mass Effect 1 again. Like, you'll be able to experience things for the first time again.
This is a problem because to me it speaks to the overall vision of Mass Effect Andromeda, which is a game that is much more backwards looking as opposed to providing a brand new vision for the future of the franchise. It's hard to recapture a moment from the past, especially one steeped in nostalgia, as more often than not, it's not possible to recreate such feelings which may not actually be rooted in the reality of what occurred at the time. If you're trying to chase after highs from the past, then you're forever going to be missing opportunities to create something new. And Andromeda itself is in love with the past Mass Effect games to an almost troubling amount. All the jokes, references, and character moments attempt to recreate things that have already occurred. Blasto jokes are aplenty, ring call is mentioned about a dozen times, Afterlife is constantly name dropped, but this also extends to the art design. The ship is very much a small iteration of the Normandy. The Nexus is just a citadel done again. Armor and weapon design are reminiscent of the past and you get the point. very little in Andromeda feels wholly original. Everything feels like an imitation of what came before, yet often done worse. I think it's important to note this lack of originality from the outset, as it's something to keep in mind as we continue to discuss the faults of Mass Effect Andromeda. I mean, just look at the very ending of the game. Even the ending of the game is backwards looking. For fuck's sake.
Is that the Quarian Ark? And Elcor? Drell? Volus? Hanar, I think.
And Elcor? Drell? Volus? Hanar, I think.
That's some delicate business, putting Hanar in stasis. Point is, they're still out there. The Keela Sia wasn't destroyed.
That's fantastic news. We need to report this right away.
But we'll talk more about this sequel baiting later on. I think it's just important to note on the outset just how unoriginal and uncreative Mass Effect Andromeda is at the outset. It can't seem to be able to create its own original moments and jokes.
Please don't touch that. As I said, Commander, don't touch that. Again, I would ask you to refrain from touching that. Perhaps "don't touch that" means something different in your language. I would rather not refer this matter to the human embassy. Touch it all you want. You'll never find out what it does.
It's killing you, isn't it? You gave up 600 years, came all the way to a new galaxy, and now you really want to know what that does. You're thinking, maybe a Thresher Maw will pop out if I just pushed hard enough. Maybe it's a 3D holo of the new Blasto vid. Blasto versus the Scourge. Go ahead. Touch it one more time. And then I'll let you in on the secret.
With that preface out of the way, we can now talk about the largest, most time-consuming issue to discuss regarding Mass Effect Andromeda. The story. I don't think it's a stretch to say that Andromeda straight up is a bad story. And I mean that from every level, from plot to characters to pacing to world building. It's all lacking. But, as I said, this is a large topic to cover, so going to have to break it down into further separate parts and discuss why each of them failed. That said, I will point out those areas in the story department that I thought Andromeda did particularly well. Like many bad stories, there are some great parts tucked away inside. The Star Wars prequels are generally regarded as crap, but that doesn't mean there aren't some scenes that just work, or at least present very interesting ideas. Right off the bat, I want to note that for a long time, I wasn't exactly sold on Andromeda's premise. I was very hostile to the idea of traveling to a completely different galaxy. It seemed like everything a fan could possibly love about Mass Effect was back in the Milky Way. The Citadel, Hanar, Volus, Elcor, Omega, and on and on. What's more is how little we had actually explored the Milky Way in the original trilogy. We never stepped foot on Palaven. We never saw Kaji or Arun, and only got a glimpse of Surkesh and Thessia. And those are just a number of world fans would have liked to have visited without the threat of the Reapers demolishing everything at the time. But the more Andromeda's release neared closer, the more I became sold on the idea and believed it was in fact the right choice. A new galaxy is, first of all, welcoming to new players who may never have played the original trilogy. It also allows the ability to tell a completely new story unrestrained by the original trilogy or any choices the player may have made at that time. The possibility for stories and unique races to encounter in Andromeda are limitless. Unfortunately, the overall problem with Andromeda's plot is just how much it fails to capitalize on this amount of a limitless possibility, providing a cliché tale with very little imagination, creativity, or real exploration for the player to discover. But we'll dive more into that later. Now, while there's a lot to talk about regarding the problems with Andromeda's story, I want to start our analysis with something positive, which is the very beginning of the game. You see, the actual opening of Andromeda, including your first real mission, I feel is actually very good. While it does have a few problems which will be magnified as the story progresses, it is in my opinion the ideal of what a good version of Mass Effect Andromeda could look like. And this actually extends beyond story but to level design and combat as well. Of course, we start with a cinematic introducing us to the Andromeda Initiative, which, while not as exciting as previous game's opening, does the job. The player wakes up, is introduced to a few new characters, and has a contentious conversation with their dad. The majority of the writing here is pretty well done. Much of the relationship between Ryder and his dad is left unspoken, but the backstory is clear. Alec Ryder is a hard-ass who likely gave no special treatment to his kids growing up, which has created a distant relationship between them. We suit up, We explore our new home and things go awry. We're then tasked with meeting back up with our crewmates and Dad while attempting to figure out just what the hell is going on this planet. The exploration feels tight and guided, allowing the player just enough space to explore, but not so much that it becomes tedious or boring navigating long stretches of open space. The player's and Ryder's mind is allowed to run rampant with speculation and questioning as to just what kind of planet and galaxy they've run into. Alien ruins are there for exploration, unique fauna and wildlife are there to scan, and Ryder comments on it all. Eventually we run into the Ket and things go south. We end up fighting our way back to our dad before turning on the planet's AC. I know I'm moving through this opening mission very quickly, but I just want to point out how good everything feels about this mission. It really does feel like a game about exploration. The closest comparison I think is an episode of Star Trek. It feels like your typical away mission with mystery and potential for discovery around every corner. The player is even allowed to roleplay their first encounter with the first aliens they meet, choosing whether to show a sign of peace or hostility on initial contact. And it all ends with a feat of human ingenuity tied with an emotional bonding between a father and their child. The great success at the end of this mission isn't killing some big alien bad guy, it's just turning on a device. A single moment of proof that humanity can travel to a whole other galaxy and still make sense of things.
It's more than hope. It's proof we weren't crazy. We can fly to a whole new galaxy and still make sense of things.
Yeah, what he said. Again, this captures that feeling of peaceful exploration similar to Star Trek, where many episodes' triumphs are simply learning about a new alien's culture. The ending is also particularly well done from a cinematography and music perspective, as both are just on point in this sequence. Again, if this first mission was a representation of all of Mass Effect Andromeda, then Andromeda would likely have been received much differently. Unfortunately, it would prove to be the exception as opposed to the norm.
I'll be damned. It's working. You did it.
There's hope at least.
This is more than hope. It's proof we weren't crazy. We can fly to a whole new galaxy and still make sense of things.
Sam had a little something to do with it.
It was simply a matter of linguistics, though I am pleased to have
Yet, as good as the opening is overall, you can already start to see the cracks in the writing from the start. For instance, despite the game repeatedly telling us that everyone here is an explorer, a dreamer for the future, in our first contact with the Ket, Liam is ready to butt protocol and gun them all down. If the initiative were Starfleet, then Liam and Ryder would have been court-martialed and kicked out of the organization that very same day for suggesting such a thing. You don't initiate first contact as peaceful explorers through the barrel of the gun. This narrative inconsistency continues with nearly every other member of the crew we meet as the mission continues. Kirkland immediately advocates for us to kill the rest of these bastards, and has a certain psychotic glee about getting some payback on these alien bastards. This is despite the fact that for all they know, they crash on the homeworld of some ancient military organization. Liam also continues to crack jokes throughout their first mission as we continue to gun down more Ket. Again, we have to ask what kind of peaceful explorers Alec Ryder recruited for his mission to Andromeda. Last I checked, making light of murder is the very opposite of the kind of traits I'd want for someone in the initiative. Again, I have to point back to Star Trek, where conflict with alien species is treated as a tragedy within the Federation. All the Federation wants to do is peacefully explore strange new worlds and seek out new life and new civilizations. Even when confronted with planet-consuming alien entities, violence is always considered the last resort, and a tragic one at that. Yet, apparently, violence is the first tool of the initiative, and one that is to be made light of.
If we can possibly avoid firing on it, then I would hope
Aren't you going to kill it?
You think like, hey, that's crazy. This thing's sucking the life off of planets. We should just shoot it.
I would argue that the crystalline entity has as much right to be here as we do.
Okay, team, listen up. I chose each of you for the Pathfinder team, not just because you're talented and passionate, but because you're dreamers, like me.
Holy shit! What was first contact protocol again?
No deadly force unless fired upon.
Yeah, said no one in the field ever. How do we handle it?
We dream of exploring the unknown, of finding the edge of the map, and then discovering what lies beyond.
Yeah, just find us a ride out of here. And take a few more of them out while you're at it.
When people look back on this, and they will, they'll remember we didn't give up. That we kept dreaming, that our first few faltering steps in Andromeda were the beginning of everything they know. We only get one chance to be first. So, let's go make history.
Liam, enough.
Right. It's just these assholes kill Kirkland.
I hear you, but this isn't the time to lose our cool.
Now I feel better.
I chose each of you for the Pathfinder team. Not just because you're talented and passionate, but because you're dreamers, like me.
But we risk turning a skirmish with these guys into something worse.
It's them or us.
Oh, it's them. Problem is, we're outnumbered. I think I really pissed that one off. Maybe because I shot him in the face.
The characters. Why is everyone so boring? The biggest and most glaring issue with Mass Effect Andromeda's story is the characters. Characters are what really makes anyone care about a story. You can have a pretty terrible plot, but if the game characters are really good and interesting, most people won't even notice. You know, like Mass Effect 2. A game that's nothing but the characters. Not the lackluster plot about stopping some weird aliens kidnapping some humans. Yet, despite this well-known fact, Andromeda has some of the weakest characters ever created, especially for a quote-unquote BioWare RPG. Something that nearly every reviewer mentioned at the time of release.
Truthfully, Andromeda's story problems stem more from delivery than from plot. The vast majority of Andromeda's characters are just dull.
Your opinion's more important. What do you think of your people?
And conversations rarely delve deeper than arduous get-to-know-you small talk. No one yells or cries or expresses any measurable emotion at any point. Even romance options feel stilted.
Your crew is a fairly generic band of Mass Effect humans and aliens. There's nothing really wrong with them, and most have deep backstories to dive into. But none struck me as memorable stars like Garrus, Tali, or Morden. But the rest seem too conflict-free to be all that interesting. Everyone getting along for the most part is a little bit boring.
But let's try to examine why they are so lackluster and boring. I know. Have you ever watched those Plinkett Star Wars prequel reviews? Remember when he asked his friends to describe prequel characters and then original trilogy characters without referencing their roles or jobs or outfits? Hey, let's try that now and apply that same question to Andromeda's characters. Now, I ain't got time and a bunch of friends who are Mass Effect nerds to ask this question to, so instead, I want you to try and answer them in your head as we go along. Ready? Let's start. Liam. He's kind of an idiot. Doesn't really listen to orders and stuff, especially when he thinks he's right. He's kind of a jokester. Doesn't take things too seriously. And he tries to get along with everyone. Morden Solis, a mad scientist. He's as likely to heal you as he is to kill you. He enjoys challenges that have a sense of danger and difficulty. He also makes unwittingly humorous remarks, but underneath it all, he hides a pain regret for his role in the genophage. Cora Harper. She was an Asari commando. I know that. Oh wait, that's a profession, not a character trait. She's stern, except not really, since she jokes around with the crew all the time. I guess sort of professional. I mean, she says she's your second in command, even though she doesn't really seem to act that way and constantly undermines you in front of the whole team. Ashley Williams. She's tough and jaded, a pessimist, extremely militant and human-focused. She doesn't really believe in intergalactic cooperation, but believes that humans stand their best on their own. She's extremely mistrustful of others, especially aliens, and really speaks from her heart. She doesn't filter her thoughts. She's also very religious. Vetra.
That is going to be fucking impossible because she doesn't have a character.
She's a Turian. She cares about her sister. and she's good at getting stuff, or so we're told. She also enjoys making jokes, I guess? Garrus Vakarian cares all about justice. He wants to do what he believes is right, even if that means breaking a few laws to do it. He has a strong moral code, but relies on others to let him know where the line is. He's also extremely loyal and sort of a competitive buddy to the main character. Callow. He's a pilot. Wait, crap, that's his profession, not his character. Okay, Callow. He likes ships. He's a Solarian. Joker, the classic comic relief. He's the kind of like that sarcastic loner nerd. He knows a lot about old Earth movies and makes jokes to alleviate tension or deviate from uncomfortable subjects. He's got a bit of a chip on his shoulder due to his disability and thus really wants to prove himself to others. He doesn't really like other people, preferring to alienate himself, but in the end, makes lasting friendships with most of the crew. Anyway, those are just a couple of examples, but I think you get the point. The large majority of the characters in Andromeda are just plain, boring, and dull. They don't really fit into any classic character archetype of a classic story or even RPG, and they all kind of just blend together. Quick, tell me which character I'm referring to. They're loyal, a good friend, care about their family, have a good sense of humor, and while they don't always follow the rules, they have a good heart and a strong sense of morals. Yeah, that's like every character in the game. Pretty much every character enjoys cracking jokes and playing games with the rest of the crew. There's no straight man or professional that refuses to engage in such childishness. There's no squad mate that's more of a renegade with a loose sense of morals. It often just feels like an entire squad made up of Caden clones, but with added jokes. Typically you want squad mates to fill out your classic D&D alignment chart, but all the characters in Andromeda are either lawful good or neutral good. What's strange is that these characters are often set up to be specific archetypes, but then end up falling into the same dull and boring jokester that every other character is. Cora is very much supposed to be a sort of cross between Caden and Miranda, a military professional that serves as your second in command and cares about things like rules and structure. Yet she never acts this way after initial conversations with her. She just acts like every other crew member. She doesn't attempt to enforce some discipline on the ship. She doesn't enjoy following the rules of the initiative and Director Tan specifically. She doesn't get upset that Liam constantly bucks the rule and isn't mad that PB does crazy things every now and then. Instead, she often joins in on these jokes and bucking of military order. Vetra is seemingly set up as a type of rogue or thief type character, with the way she's able to use her connections and charms to get us onto the Tempest quickly, but this skill is never really displayed again. Vetra is loyal to the initiative. She doesn't have any sort of loose morals you'd expect from this type of archetype, nor does her alleged charisma and number of connections play any real importance to the story or her character. She doesn't attempt to extract any favors or resources from the player in exchange for her underworld knowledge and connections. She's just willing to help the initiative, no matter what. It'd be like if after Han shot Greedo, he suddenly became this nice guy and offered to take Luke and Obi-Wan to Alderaan free of charge, just because he's that nice of a guy. Curiously, some of the best written characters in Andromeda are the ones that we aren't allowed to have as squad mates. Dr. Lexi is a good example. Not only is her voice acting by Natalie Dormer phenomenal, she's also one of the few well-rounded characters in the game. Dr. Lexi is a doctor. She acts like a professional, much like how Cora is supposed to act. She doesn't really crack jokes. In fact, she often gets annoyed when others crack jokes around her. Yet, despite her age and experience, she often feels like she's in over her head and may actually be too much of a serious professional. Again, these are traits that make her character interesting, not jokes or forced attempts at friendship. Then there's Reyes, a smooth-talking, charismatic smuggler. You know, a thief with a heart of gold. Hey, wait a second. Who cares? If it works, it works. Reyes to me is the most baffling character due to the fact that he isn't a squad mate. Reyes is exactly what our squad is missing in the game, and I mean this on multiple levels. Not only does he fill this sort of rogue slash thief with a loose moral archetype that is virtually non-existent in our squad makeup in the game, he also happens to offer a different perspective outside the initiative and comes with his own cool little twist. Let me break this down a little further. The characters in the original trilogy were more than just archetypes or well-rounded characters. They helped to flesh out the world of the original Mass Effect. They each had their own unique insights into the galaxy, how things worked, how things should work, and taught us about their race if they were alien. Mordin may be a Solarian and comic relief, but he also gives us a unique insight into the Genophage conflict and causes us to question the morality of the situation. Ashley might be annoying, but it's because she offers us a glimpse of what other humans in that world think, that perhaps humanity needs to stand on its own, that maybe all these aliens can't be trusted. Now, look at Andromeda. Almost every squad member and non-squad member is from the Milky Way, and not only that, the majority are aligned with the Initiative. As a result, they offer very little in terms of a diverse perspective on this new galaxy or the situations we involve ourselves in. Drac is most perplexing because despite leaving the Initiative with the rest of the Krogan, he still spends most of his time on the Nexus chatting with his Rushan. He doesn't really offer any unique insight on this new galaxy from a Krogan point of view and tells us very little bit about what life is like outside the Initiative. On the other hand, Reyes is the character that left with the exiles from the Initiative following their little civil war. He offers a different perspective on what life can be like in Andromeda outside of the control of the Initiative and the Nexus. Just think how odd it is that despite the fact that we constantly hear about the uprising that occurred on the Nexus before we arrived, we never recruit a squad mate that tells us the other side of the story from the perspective of the exiles. And the squad mates that were there for the uprising, Callo, Vetro, Drac, none of them really talk about it. None of them have stories about friends, lovers, or family who ended up on opposite sides in the conflict. In fact, none of them seem to really care that much of the uprising or the fact that the entire Initiative, representing the future of the Milky Way species, has been fractured. It's only Reyes that offers us some glimpse of these issues, and we barely get enough time with him. Funnily enough, these two characters I've just mentioned, Dr. Lexi and Reyes, were written by the same writer, Courtney Woods. Wait, what's that? The smooth-talking, cheating, hard-drinking, womanizing rogue that is Reyes was written by a woman? What was that about SJW's ruining Mass Effect? Hey, BioWare, give this lady a promotion. She clearly has a better understanding of characters in conflict than, say, Chris Schlurf, who wrote this masterpiece.
Commander Lasky, pursuant to Article 55 of UNSC Regulation 12-14572, I'm ordering you to remove that AI's data chip and retire it for final dispensation. Remove the chip now, Commander.
Please.
Give me that chip. No, sir. Lieutenant! Arrest that man!
Captain.
Arrest him!
On the subject of characters, I can't wrap up talking about all these characters and how they fail without mentioning the player character themselves, Ryder. And oh boy, how do I describe in just how many ways Ryder fails at being a compelling character. In making this video, I watched so many reviews, all of which seem to mention this disconnect they felt between Ryder and themselves. Why were they feeling this disconnect, many asked themselves. I know why. It's because in Mass Effect Andromeda you don't roleplay as yourself, i.e. a fictional avatar inserted into this universe. In Mass Effect Andromeda, you roleplay as Ryder. This is going to take a little bit of time to explain, but stay with me. In the majority of BioWare RPGs, the player character serves as an effective avatar for the player into their fictional world. They come with only the most bare-bones common personality, but it's mostly left up to the player to define the type of person their character is. This is called role-playing. The player can decide whether they want to be a peaceful lawmaker that attempts to mediate disputes with words, or a ruthless bastard that believes every problem can be solved through the barrel of the gun or the point of their sword. Now, some RPGs have really defined player characters. In these RPGs, you do not roleplay as yourself or some fantasy version of yourself. You roleplay as the character. This is the approach taken in the Witcher series. In the Witcher series, you roleplay as Geralt, not yourself. Geralt is a very well-defined character. He is a Witcher. He has a strong sense of justice. He loves women. He loves Ciri. He likes to drink and play cards, and he has a sort of wry sense of humor. The role-playing comes in how you believe Geralt will respond to a situation. Which side on a tough moral conflict would he come down on? Which one of his past lovers will he end up with? This latter type of role-playing is much more reliant on the defined character being likable, since the player can't change their core personality. If the player doesn't like Geralt and his dry sense of humor, then they aren't going to like playing as him. With all that said, let's go back to the original Mass Effect. I think it's pretty obvious which one of these approaches the original trilogy falls under. In the original trilogy, you role-played as yourself, however you felt that fantasy version of yourself should be. Shepard could be an optimistic and diplomatic paragon, or a jaded, ruthless soldier that only cared that the mission was accomplished, or anything and everything in between. By the end of the trilogy, many players felt a real ownership of this Shepard, very much because it was their Shepard, completely unique from another player's Shepard. It's why people got so emotional and angry over the ending of Mass Effect 3. At the very end, it felt as though their Shepard was being taken away from them and instead replaced with one that had very little control over.
Maybe you don't. We really want people who are just picking this up for the first time to just be able to jump in. And then for the players who, of course, have played Mass Effect 1 and 2, they can dig deeper. They can find out what their choices did. They can find out what their choices did. Find out what their choices did. They can find out what their choices did. They can find out what their choices did.
No. You always had a plan. Masked life signs or an onboard medical stasis program maybe. You wouldn't.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
They can find out what their choices did.
What was I talking about? Right, role-playing. So, now looking at Andromeda, we can see things are clearly different. Ryder is not Shepard. They are not a player-defined avatar in this world. Instead, they are a set and defined character as dictated by the writers that the player is allowed to roleplay as. Ryder has a preset backstory outside the player's control. Ryder has an entire family that the player knows nothing about at the start. He has an entire relationship with his family outside the player's control. Ryder is inexperienced. Ryder loves to crack jokes. Ryder is not very good at commanding or leading. They are a good friend to all their crewmates and generally don't take things too seriously. You can't change these things about Ryder. No matter how much we think as a player Liam is a fucking idiot, Ryder will not tear his ass a new one or kick him off the ship. You can't act like an asshole racist to Jarl. You can't act uncaring and cold when Vetcher decides to tell you about her relationship with her sister. You are a nice guy or gal. Period. And did I say how much you love to crack jokes? No matter how much you choose the supposed logical or professional response choices, Ryder loves to joke about stuff, even when they're trying to be serious.
Except I am gonna fuck your shit up. How's that for great?
Of course, this can all be seen in the very opening moments of Andromeda. This is immediately when a player will notice something different about Ryder than, say, past BioWare protagonists. So we wake up where we are greeted by two crowd technicians, and the first word out of the player's mouth is a joke, totally outside of your control. Afterwards we meet Dr. Lexi and are given our first real dialogue choice. But, despite telling us there are 4 tone options, emotional, logical, casual, and professional, we are only given 2 choices. This is important because not only are we forced to roleplay as Ryder, our options to roleplay are also significantly decreased compared to past titles. Let's look at past BioWare titles now. Mass Effect 1 is up first. After a really awesome opening cinematic, the first word out of the player character's mouth is nothing. That's right, nothing. Instead, the player decides what's the first thing Shepard will say, whether he'll join in on the playful conversation, act more professional, or shut the whole conversation down. 3 options in total, and these 3 dialogue options are the bare minimum we'll see for the majority of the first 2 titles: Paragon, Renegade, and a more neutral response. Mass Effect 3 takes away the more neutral response in the last game, which, according to the developers, was done to force the player to finally take a side on issues instead of remaining neutral. But it can be forgiven for removing this option due to the sheer amount of reactivity and choices that Mass Effect 3 has to deal with, not only taking into account all the choices and conversations the player had in the last 2 games, but all the decisions they will be making in Mass Effect 3 as well. But let's also look at another BioWare title that came out just 2 years before Andromeda, Dragon Age Inquisition. After our initial opening cinematic, the first word out of the player character's mouth is, you guessed it, nothing. Our Inquisitor doesn't say a single word before the player is able to define the response and thus personality for their character. Indeed, in our very first conversation, the player can choose to remain silent. Also, notice how in this first conversation we are introduced to the 4 different tone choices, and lo and behold, we get 4 dialogue choices. This is something I really have to stress when it comes to Inquisition, because Dragon Age Inquisition is probably the deepest role-playing game BioWare has made since Origins and Baldur's Gate, speaking purely from its conversation system. In Dragon Age Inquisition, the player is almost always given a bare minimum of 3 types of responses, similar to Mass Effect. However, this is the bare minimum used to comment on a situation. Almost any time in Dragon Age Inquisition, when someone specifically asks the player a question, especially when they're asking their opinion on a matter, the player is typically given a bare minimum of 4 responses. And I do mean a bare minimum, as conversations can often sometimes have up to 6 different responses. There are your typical aggressive, confused, emotional, and stoic response. Then there are additional responses based upon your class or race, such as elf, dwarf, kunari, human noble, and mage. And then finally, perk responses you can later gain, including history knowledge, underworld connections, and arcane knowledge. That can end up being as many as 7 different responses the player can all end up choosing for one conversation. The game knows especially to offer these breadth of choices at important moments. Check out this scene where the player is finally offered the title of Inquisitor. Note the number of responses available. Nothing like this exists in Mass Effect Andromeda. The player is almost always given just 2 dialogue responses, with many times there not being much difference between the 2. At most, the player might be given 3 or maybe even 4 responses at rare story critical moments, but these are few and far between. Let's just look at the scene where the player is made Pathfinder, a critical scene you would think, similar to the player becoming Inquisitor in Dragon Age, don't you think? Let's observe.
You're the new Pathfinder, Sarah.
Whoa. Well, if that's how it has to be.
Don't sell yourself short. I think you can do it.
Cora?
It's what he wanted. I won't stand in the way. But being Pathfinder is a serious job. Sure you're ready for this?
We get 2 initial dialogue choices. Afterwards, it branches and we get a grand total of 4 responses, all of which express the same opinion based on one of the 2 responses we picked earlier. Thus, while it attempts to mimic the depth found in Inquisition, it in actuality limits our responses to just 2 options. We either feel ready to be Pathfinder or we don't. I don't think I need to drive the point home any further than that. In Andromeda, you roleplay as Ryder, and your options to define Ryder are extremely limited. What this means is that the player has very little ownership over the Ryder, as their Ryder is very much the same as everyone else's Ryder, a far cry from the custom Shepherd they crafted in the original trilogy. And unfortunately, Ryder is simply not a likable enough character like, say, Geralt in the Witcher series for many players to want to roleplay as them. Now that we've talked about the game's opening and the characters, we can finally start to pick away at the plot of this game, because boy is it a fucking mess. I mean, it's really hard to describe just how bad the plot of this game is when you look at it from a beat by beat moment, but you know, I'm gonna give it a try. So after our father dies because he was too stupid to, pass his helmet back and forth with his child for 2 minutes, we wake up back on the Hyperion with Sam's connection being transferred to us. Hey wait, did anyone recover my dad's body? I don't know, because no one ever says, and we never have a funeral for him. Boy, I guess Ryder really was dissing with their father. Anyway, we're told that because we have the Sam connection, we are the new Pathfinder. Wait, what? Why is the Pathfinder title just passed on to anyone that has the Sam connection? I thought Pathfinders were chosen because of their experience, skill, and intelligence.
Every arc has its own team, and every team has its own Pathfinder. Senior mission officers, experts in survival, diplomacy, and if that fails, combat. Our Pathfinder on Arc Hyperion is Alec Ryder, whose pioneering service history speaks for itself. A skilled soldier with N7 ranking and a talented scientist, Ryder was a member of the original task force who traveled through the Charon Mass Relay and took humanity's first steps across the galaxy. Now, he's preparing us to tackle the next great frontier, Andromeda.
Not simply having an AI implant. What the fuck does Sam have to do with the job of being a Pathfinder? Shut up! Don't tell me about how a Sam connection is necessary to activate the vault to stabilize all the planets. Nobody knew this at the time, or that other vaults existed on other worlds beyond Habitat 7. So, I ask again, why does Ryder now having a Sam connection make him qualified to lead all of humanity in its search for a new home. Anybody else sensing a real problem here with the premise just at the start of the game? Moving on, we meet up with the Nexus, which is supposed to be fully constructed by now and serve as the hub for all the various arcs and pathfinders, but we dock, only to discover it half completed and no one to greet us upon our arrival. An ominous welcome to our new home in this galaxy. We're eventually told that there was an uprising on the Nexus, how everyone thought we were dead, and that the Nexus was running out of power for some reason. Wait, why was it running out of power? You're telling me the station that was supposed to be the hub of all activity and Andromeda was running out of power just over a year into its operation by itself? Whatever, but don't worry, we now have power to back up the Ark, and this subject of power is never brought up again. How convenient. This also brings up a larger question about the entire Nexus that I'll get into later. No wait, I'll get into it now. Part 1. The Nexus makes no goddamn sense. Why in Star Child's name does the Nexus exist? I want you to think about this from an in-universe perspective for a minute. What purpose does the Nexus serve? Well, Total is supposed to be a hub of all activity in Andromeda, a space station where all the arcs can meet up and begin their search for a new home in Andromeda, right? Okay, but why does it look instead like the Citadel? You know, a permanent home for millions of species? You see, the real reason the Nexus exists is because the developers just wanted another Citadel, a hub base you would return to every now and then to pick up side quests and chat to people. Hey, remember what I said about the game being backwards looking? However, the Citadel made perfect sense in Mass Effect 1. It was a location you wanted to and often needed to return to periodically to get new side quests and learn more about the galaxy. It was, after all, the hub of all activity in the Milky Way galaxy. The Nexus fails on so many levels, it's hard to properly convey just how much it fails. First, it's simply not as essentially, from a gameplay perspective, as the Citadel. The majority of the side quests we get in the game, we get from exploring planets, not from returning to the Nexus. Additionally, since the Nexus is full of Milky Way species, there is nothing we can learn from returning there, as everything new we want to learn about in the Andromeda Galaxy is out there, not on the Nexus. This means that a player has less incentive to return to what is a boring and sterile station, devoid of any wonder or mystery. Secondly, as I began to touch on, the Nexus makes no sense from a narrative perspective and undercuts the entire premise of the game. The whole point of the game is Ryder, as Pathfinder, attempting to find a new home for humanity and the rest of the Milky Way species. The idea is that the situation is dire, and that humanity, as it exists in the Andromeda Galaxy, might well go extinct if a home isn't found. What did Alex say?
We're marooned. 20,000 souls adrift at sea. And when the power runs out and stays out, we need to know if that's safe harbor.
And if it's not?
As Pathfinder, it'll be my job to find an alternative. It's what we trained for. But if this goes well, we are already home.
Except, the existence of the Nexus means that this isn't the case. The Nexus is a completely self-sufficient station with ample living space for tens of thousands of species. It is, as its design suggests, a clone of the Citadel, and the Citadel in Mass Effect 1 was a completely self-sufficient station that millions of species lived on for their entire lives. The Citadel grew its own food, recycled its own water, had its own industry, and on and on. The Nexus very much appears to be the same way. We see sprawling open spaces in the distance, homes to house civilians waking up from cryosleep. For fuck's sake, they've got plants growing all around the Nexus, which suggests they can even make their own oxygen, independent of any need for a life support system. What this means is that Ryder's job as a human pathfinder was done the minute the Hyperion Arc restored power to the Nexus. The Nexus can house and care for tens of thousands of individuals for an indefinite amount of time without real worry. Sure, people could complain about, wanting to have a real solid ground to stand on, but that's just a complaint. The survival of humanity is no longer at stake so long as the Nexus exists, as it takes care of all of their immediate needs, including food, water, shelter, oxygen, and security for the foreseeable future. So tell me, why exactly is Ryder needed? Part 2. Their journey begins with a whole lot of nothing. Alright, moving on from that tangent, we're introduced to the Nexus leadership, many of whom are filling in for others who died. We learn that Gian Garrison was killed, that the Krogan left the initiative following the uprising, and meet the person who claims to be in charge of everything, Director Tan. Now, Tan I think is one of the more fascinating characters in Andromeda because once again he isn't a boring goody idiot, but actually sees things in more shades of grey. We learn about his more cold and pragmatic approach to the Krogans, and can't help but draw comparisons to his cold political nature with that of Ambassador Udina in the original trilogy. Unfortunately, the story never really does anything interesting with him, but whatever. He doesn't think we're very special, but wants to appear like he's doing something, so he lets you have a new ship, the Tempest, to check out the first field outpost in the initiative. And after some light bickering, we finally get to board our ship, the Tempest, which despite having been scouting the Helios cluster and the Scourge for over a year, is in pristine condition. Boy, this game really does have a problem with its art design clashing with its narrative. Like how everyone on the Nexus is supposed to be down to the last supplies and running out of power, yet everyone looks clean and dressed up, and the entire Nexus appears to be in pristine condition? Weird. I mean, it's not like a past that has shown what a station looks like when it's on limited supplies and suffering from overcrowding. Oh. Wait. I digress. We quickly hop on board, give a brief horrible speech to our crew, and blam! We're off to Eos. This is when the game first really opens up, and we can say Andromeda actually starts. It's also where people begin to complain about the game's slow opening pace. Now, I was never one of those to complain about the game's slow opening. You see, there's this little thing called pacing that's been lost in a lot of video games lately. But basically, you shouldn't have a game that starts off in a 10 in action and stays that way the whole game. A good game and a good narrative should have an effective pace, with a good arc. Eos, upon first appearance, feels like a good slow opening to the game, one where the player is slowly introduced to the open world and all the various other gameplay systems as the story is doled out in a careful manner. However, the problems with Andromeda also all begin with Eos, as what should be the slow opening to the game turns out to be the actual majority of the game. Everything you do on Eos and how it's all paced is exactly how the rest of the game will play out. You go to a planet, do a story mission there, likely say to do all the side quests and turn on the planet's AC, and then you leave. You travel across one barren landscape to another, conducting menial tasks for a bare minimum of experience. But we'll talk about this repetitive gameplay loop later. Let's continue with the plot. We make it to some ruins that look an awful lot like the ruins we found on Habitat 7, where we are introduced to another idiot named PB that immediately attacks the player without warning. Hello? I've been shooting things attacking me for a while now. Maybe not the smartest move to attack someone fully armed and loaded. Anyway, she tells us these ruins are from some race called Remnant, and if you do enough Sudoku puzzles, it'll unlock another vault you can explore. So we do that, and travel down into the mysterious ancient alien vault of unknown mysteries and secrets. Inside we find a vast underground megastructure of unknown purpose, where we are attacked on sight by weakened Sentinel Guardians. We eventually turn on the AC after it tries to kill us, and then learn that there are other vaults on other worlds. Thus, maybe we should check out those worlds as well, even though this doesn't really matter, since we've just stabilized Eos' atmosphere, clearing it of radiation and making it habitable for human life. Seriously? Why isn't the story over at this point? Not only does the Nexus exist to support everyone, we now have a stabilized planet with a breathable atmosphere and vegetation, and it will only improve with time now that we've turned on the Remnant terraforming vault. You know, that whole "you're the last hope for humanity" tagline really doesn't apply anymore after this first real mission. We've completed our job as a Pathfinder. We found humanity and the rest of Make Way species a home. Why the fuck should we care that other vaults exist on other worlds? Is our job to secure a home in Andromeda or to track down the mysterious alien vaults? You think the more pressing concern for the Pathfinder after stabilizing this new home for everyone would be to find the remaining missing arcs, but those are all mostly side quests. Instead, the main plot is to continue traveling through unexplored space to look for more alien vaults that we know nothing about and don't really need. And so we wrap up our time on Eos, but not before we're asked to make a meaningless choice about whether we want to set up a military outpost or a science outpost first. It really doesn't matter anyway, this never really comes up again. Part 3. Fuck you, Sam. Zoom. Blam. We lift off from Eos, this new planet where we know another remnant vault is located. But, oh no, we run into the bad guy in the process. First, let's excuse how two ships traveling in the infinite expanse of space manage to run into one another and pick apart how dumb this initial interaction with the Archon is. So, in a scene reminiscent of Star Trek, the Archon speaks to us via viewscreen. I didn't even know our window could do that. How come we never use it to communicate with someone like this ever again? It seemed like everyone just used those, holo communicators. Could it be because the writers are lazy and inconsistent? The answer is yes. Back to this initial meeting. Once again, we get some super cringeworthy dialogue that makes us feel like we're watching a Saturday morning cartoon and not, Mass Effect. The Archon attempts to act like a badass but fails miserably, spouting the stupid line about how we can't comprehend what he's after. I'm noticing a pattern here.
I won't explain what you can't understand.
Pretender, you toy with forces beyond your ken, no more.
Rudimentary creatures of blood and flesh. You touch my mind, fumbling in ignorance, incapable of understanding. There is a realm of existence so far beyond your own, you cannot even imagine it. I am beyond your comprehension. I am sovereign.
But, considering the series vets just came off of facing, the Reapers, a galactic destroying force, it's hard to feel threatened by this bone-faced dude in one ship. So again, in a scene reminiscent of Star Trek, Ryder attempts to keep the Archon talking, while Sam figures out a way to pilot through the Scourge. Oh, wait a second. Sam figures out a way to fly through the Scourge? Ah, jeez. I guess I gotta talk about this now. And why, even this early on, we see how fucking overpowered Sam is and how his involvement in everything regarding the story ruins the narrative. Sam fucking does everything in Andromeda, and I mean everything. He can pilot the ship, activate all the remnant tech, tell us about the planet we just arrived on, hack into enemy communications, make all the suggestions, kill the hero, revive the hero, and wipe our ass too. Sam is too heavily tied into everything in Andromeda that in all seriousness, it replaces Ryder as the protagonist of the story. Ryder isn't needed for anything. He's just a vessel with which Sam is transported. Sam is the one that activates all the remnant tech. It's Sam that's able to translate the language into something readable. Sam is the one doing everything in the damn story. Ryder is just a driver that transports Sam across the galaxy to do everything, and he does so at Sam's own suggestions. Let's get back to the scene and break down why it's so dumb and fails to understand the basics of character writing. You got a scene with some really fast crew calculations and teamwork is needed to pilot the ship out of the Scourge. Right, so instead of Sam doing, everything, the smart way to construct a scene would be for, the crew to solve the problem, especially Callow and Suvi. Suvi should be the one making all these rapid calculations, and Callow attempting to pilot the ship, adjusting his course at breakneck speeds every time Suvi makes an adjustment, something that would give us further character building of the crew, especially of our supposed pilot. But instead, Sam makes all these calculations and then tells Callow to just go, after which he easily pilots the ship through the Scourge thanks to Sam's hard work. Boy, that was really tense. I'm glad you were here to save us, Callow. I couldn't have done it without you. Oh wait, I mean the opposite. Part 4. Angara and the Planet of Convenience. After our tense and daring escape, we arrive at our next planet, Aya, a planet hidden within the Scourge, and home to the first and only other aliens we'll interact with in Andromeda, the Angara. Right away they start speaking in their alien language which we don't understand. This makes sense since we've never met them before. We're then directed to a landing pad, and once we get out, we're greeted by a number of Angara, and then the stupid immediately starts to hit us in the face. The Angara start speaking to us in English, or whatever human language we're using. So now the player is already like, huh? And what? We're soon told that we're not the first humans they've encountered, but they don't tell us anything beyond that. Now, we don't see any other humans on Aya. In fact, we never do, besides our crew in the whole game. Yet somehow, not only do the Angara know about us and all the other Milky Way races in the 14 months since the Nexus has been here, they've also managed to perfectly translate their language into a format we can comprehend and understand all our languages, including Human, Asari, Turian, and Krogan. Listen, I need you to stop right now and understand just how truly dumb this really is. I need you to take yourself out of what the game tells you to cover up these plot holes and convenience and think about this real hard. Yes, I know we'll later learn the exiles kicked the Angara off of Kadara so they'd know about us, which will also explain how stupid that is later. But think about this from the perspective of the Angara after everything we've learned about them and how convenient everything is. The Angara have only met one other alien race before we arrived, the Ket, and the Ket only arrived about 80 years ago. 80 years isn't a very long time. In fact, it's not even that long in human years. You've got 80-year-olds running all over Earth. Now it would seem more likely that the Ket would already know the Angara language before officially meeting the Angara, since the Archon was trying to trick them into a false sense of security. That means the Angara should have no real need for translator technology at this point. So, 80 years later, they encounter a large diverse group of aliens, each speaking different languages with different dialects, and yet they are somehow able in just under a year to develop translators that can understand Turian, Asari, Krogan, and human, and output their language so we can understand them. Huh? I know this seems like really nitpicking here, but it establishes an important precedent which I can now get into: the convenience of the Angara and the entire Helios cluster. What do I mean? Well, despite traveling millions of light years away to a new galaxy, one outside of the hidden control and guidance of the Reapers, we just so happen to land in a cluster where everyone's technology is conveniently on the same level as ours. In fact, they even seem to utilize the same design facets as us. Angara use Omni tools on their wrists. Angara have little eye scouters. Angara have holo communicators. Ket and Angara use projectile type weapons with triggers. Ket use 4-wheel track vehicles. Angara interior design is oddly familiar to humans, and so on. You see, the original trilogy bypassed a lot of the sameness of design between species because of the Reapers. Why do Solarians and Turians use roughly the same weapons and happen to be on the same technological level? Because the Reapers have been secretly pushing every galactic civilization to utilize their technology in an attempt to control the chaos of organic evolution. So, when a Solarian starts talking to a human about, manipulating Mass Effect fields to create warp drives, the human isn't scratching his head because all his technology is based off of the same Prothean technology as the Solarians. Back to Andromeda. No such explanation exists in this new galaxy. Concepts like Mass Effect fields, biotics, projectile-based weapons, triggers, hell, even the ergonomic design of a chair should be alien to a new species we encounter in Andromeda. The chances of us running into a race on the same technological level as ourselves should be incredibly small. Yet in Andromeda, both the Ket and Angara, two completely alien races, happen to be on the same technology-wise as the rest of the Milky Way galaxy, and their technology happens to be oddly familiar with our own designs. This is just laziness on a level I can't even comprehend, a total lack of creative vision. If you just wanted the player to have the same encounters and fights as everything they'd seen and fought in the past, then why not just stay in the Milky Way? Why waste all that hard work of going to a new galaxy if everything is virtually the same as it was in the Milky Way? And I haven't even touched on how boring and safe the design of both the Angara and Ket are. Two humanoid races with 2 eyes, 2 hands, fingers, and toes. Lazy. I'm going on this tangent now because I is the point when the player finally realizes just how boring and unimaginative this new galaxy and game really is. You see, I strongly suspect the developers were hoping that Aya will be similar to the Citadel moment in Mass Effect 1. That moment when you feel how vast and alien this new world you're entering was. But that's simply not the case. Aya is more of the same. In fact, it's worse than anything in the original trilogy. In Mass Effect 1, when you first arrive on the Citadel, everything is new to the player. All these new races to talk to, all this new technology to learn about, how intergalactic politics work, how the intergalactic economy works, how law enforcement works, and everything and anything else. I should note, these aren't just things dumped into our codex that we're supposed to read. Mass Effect makes us learn about the majority of these things through talking and doing quests. We learn about C-Sect by helping out Jenny. We learn about banking by talking to Barla Vaughn. We learn about politics inadvertently by helping out Shayera the consort, and so on. Nothing like this exists in Andromeda, nor on any of our repeated visits to Aya, but we'll get into the serious lacking of depth to the side quests later. I know I keep going off on these tangents from the plot, but it's necessary to understand why the plot falls apart on any close inspection. So back to Aya. We meet a bunch of Angara, we're told there's a resistance against the Ket. Wait, why are they called the resistance and not just the army? Oh, okay, let me explain why calling the Angaran war effort against the Ket the resistance is so dumb. No wait, let me not go on another tangent. Just recognize that it's dumb. We tell the Angara we want to look into their remnant vault on Aya, but they tell us only some person called the Moshai knows where it is, for some reason, because an advanced alien species such as them wouldn't keep detailed records about the location of a massive, unknown alien structure on their planet. But maybe they're lying to us, so fuck it. They said we have to rescue the Moshai to get access to the vault, and also gain trust of the Angaran people in the process. Whatever, we're told that this weirdo named Jaw is going to tag along. Great, and off we go to do everything. Again. Part 5. Harval, Vold, and a fake moral choice. So I know we can choose which planet to go to next, but let's quickly do Harval and then dive into Vold's nonsense. We get to Harval where once again none of the Angar are too concerned about these weird aliens they've likely met for the first time, and are told some scientists got trapped in one of the remnant sites. We go over there, solve some Sudoku, and free the trapped Angara. Once again my brain fell out of my head at this next scene. Remember, from the perspective of these scientists, they just wanted to study a vault and were trapped. They had no knowledge of time passing during this trapping. And while they may have also heard about these new aliens called humans and Turians, they've likely never seen one up close. So after we free them, blam! We appear right in front of their face. So instead of being like, really scared and maybe even trying to attack us, they just appear mildly confused before agreeing to go back to their base camp to catch up on missed events.
Scott! Scotting stars! What? Who are you? How did...
Pathfinder Ryder, with the Andromeda Initiative. I'm from another galaxy. Take a moment, find your bearings.
More aliens? Out of nowhere? And y'all?
The writers just don't care at this point. And with that wonderful quest solved, we can leave Harval and travel to Vold, a planet on the front lines of the war with the Ket. Excuse me, resistance with the Ket. Funny though, despite all these references to war and Dara's under siege by the Ket, we don't actually witness any of that on the planet. Let's continue on though. We meet some resistance members who agree to take us to the facility to rescue the Moshai where she's being held prisoner. And thanks to our trusty Sam, we can breach the facility and rescue the Moshai. The actual rescue mission isn't too bad. I'll even ignore the Angar using Alliance weapons in the cutscenes. We fight through this alien facility, investigating various rooms and listening to strange audio logs. Eventually, we meet up with the Ket leaders of this facility and learn that the Ket are transforming the Angara into Ket in a type of religious ceremony called exaltation. The implication being that the Ket absorb the genetic traits of every alien species they encounter in an attempt to make their race the superior race, having incorporated all the best traits of all the species they've exalted. It's not actually a bad idea for a new species if only the game spent more time actually exploring the Ket. Instead, after Jal is done crying over this revelation, we shoot our way to the end of the facility where we rescue the Moshai. And it's at this point we get to what is supposed to be our first real hard moral choice of the game. Whether to bomb the facility now and likely kill hundreds of innocent Angara, or to leave the facility intact for the moment in order for the Angara to escape. This choice is one of the stupidest parts of the game, in a game surrounded by stupidity. First, for some reason the Moshai is totally up for blowing the facility up now, even though it means killing her fellow prisoners. This might be fun if it was established that the Moshai was a, ruthless, heartless leader, willing to do whatever it takes to fight the Ket. Someone like Ephra, who we met earlier. But, as we know, her character is the complete opposite of this once we get to know her. Instead, she's quite caring and emotional when it comes to safeguarding her people. But the real reason this choice is so stupid is because it's not a real choice. Why would we blow up the facility now and kill all the Angara when we can just rescue them now and blow up the facility later? The facility isn't mobile and we know its exact location. We've also managed to kill off a majority of its defenders. Hell, this point is even made by individuals within our team during this decision. Yet, despite this, we never go back to blow up the facility in the future and it's never mentioned again. The facility that is considered an abomination by the Angara. Just, all around wonderful writing, guys. Just really good job.
Just one of the things that makes us great.
all on our own.
Part 6. Kadara, and I think I'm having a brain aneurysm. After rescuing the Moshai, we take her back to Aya, where we visit the Remnant Vault. Inside, we discover what appears to be a central control network for all the vaults in the Helios cluster. But, in order to get its precise location, we'll have to infiltrate the Archon ship to download his data regarding Meridian. However, the only person who can give us the location of the Archon ship is an Angaran trader currently hiding out on Kadara Port. And this is where the game's narrative officially breaks down, where all the little plot holes and inconsistencies fall on top of one another and the player is left totally confused and the game's fiction is forever broken. What am I talking about? You see, we're told Venturev, this Angaran trader, is on Kadara Port, a place we've never heard of, at which point Ephra tells us that it was an abandoned Angaran port before exiles from the Nexus came and took over. There are so many things wrong with this that I'm having trouble even deciding where to begin. First off, why are we, as the human Pathfinder, just now being informed of this exile port? At this point, an average player of the game has been playing for at least 20 hours now, and yet we are only now being informed that exiles from the Nexus have managed to set up their own thriving port base on another planet. Second, why in the hell are we learning about this from the Angara and not, anyone from the Nexus, including our own fucking crew? Individuals like Vetra and Drac know all about Kadara and apparently routinely do business there. You're telling me, in the 1,000 or so hours we spent traveling around the cluster and traipsing across barren planets, the subject of where the exiles from the Nexus never once came up? But lastly, and this is the biggest point, the existence of Kadara destroys the premise of the game and the player's role. Again, we are the human Pathfinder, tasked with finding a new home for humanity and the Milky Way species in general. On our first arrival on the Nexus, we're told no outpost they've tried to set up has succeeded, everyone failing in some way or another. This is why our little victory on Eos is supposed to be a big deal. However, the existence of Kadara shatters this fiction. Not only is Kadara a thriving port made possible by the Nexus exiles, it was set up entirely without the aid of the Nexus, and it's not as if it's some big secret. Everyone on the Nexus knows that Kadara exists. At which point, we now have to ask, what exactly was the point of Ryder settling Eos? Humanity and the Milky Way species were not in some desperate need of a safe home when Ryder arrived. Apparently, they already had one, on Kadara. Yes, the water is toxic, but it's clearly explained that Kadara has filtration systems to filter out these toxins, so that means the Remnant Vault isn't even needed to terraform the planet because it's already livable. What's more, it's apparent that Kadara is capable of supporting life outside the immediate safe zone of the port set up by Sloan Kelly, as the player routinely encounters individuals living out in the Badlands quite successfully, having no trouble securing clean drinking water and food despite the alleged harsh conditions. It's at this point we have to question the motives and intelligence of the initiative. At no point do they think to tell the Pathfinder that such a planet exists, forcing us to do all that crap on Eos. Really, it seems more like the entire initiative are a bunch of stubborn assholes that don't want to admit that the exiles didn't need their leadership to establish a successful outpost in Andromeda. But the reality is this plot development is just another massive hole in the game's narrative, as at no point can the player confront the initiative or their squadmates for keeping this information from them. With Kadara's existence, the entire threat of humanity going extinct was neutralized before Ryder ever showed up in Andromeda. Thus, in one fell swoop, this little exchange between the Angara and Ryder destroys whatever semblance of narrative cohesion existed in the game. Honestly, I could stop my analysis of the plot right here, but things only get worse. Part 7. The Archon Ship, and another fake moral choice. I'm not going to dwell any further on Kadara Port, especially since the main plot connection to the place is so tenuous. All you're required to do is talk to Sloan Kelly, get access to Ven, and pick up the transponder in the Badlands, at which point you can leave Kadara to attack the Archon ship and never return. I'm not even going to talk about how badly Montreal bungled Sloan's character. Now that we have the Archon's transporter, we can finally infiltrate his ship and get the location to Meridian. Again, the stupidity starts hitting us in the face once we start thinking about the premise of, well, everything. Alright, so think about this. Once again, we have to take a look at things from the perspective of the characters in this universe. First of all, We know the Archon is the leader of the Ket in the Helios cluster, and that he's been here for decades without any apparent reinforcements. That means the Archon and the Ket and Helios have a limited amount of resources, especially ships from which to launch their attacks from. So, given everything that we know, how come no one has attacked the Archon ship before? This is a legitimate question to ask, as killing the Archon would seriously disrupt the Ket's war against the Angara. In fact, we know it does due to the ending of the game. The only explanation I can think of is that the Angara aren't advanced enough that they've developed ships as large as the Archons. We never see the Angara equivalent of a destroyer or a dreadnought, just those little shuttles they use. And I'm still not sure if they are faster than light warp drives. So maybe they don't have the technology and resources to mount an attack on his ship. It's not like a few shuttles making a suicide run armed with nukes that could detonate inside the ship is a feasible tactic. Oh, wait. But wait a second. If the Angara are so ill-equipped to attack Ket dreadnoughts, then how did that one Angaran traitor capture his own Ket dreadnought? Dear God, this narrative is so inconsistent. You're telling me an Angara managed to capture this massive vessel, and he decides to use it for pirating instead of, blowing up the one enemy of his people that has been conducting a campaign of genocide against them for decades. By the way, who was this person pirating in the first place? Fuck it, we'll talk about that later when we get to side quests. I still have more to talk about the stupidity of this Archon flagship Infiltration. It's got so many layers of stupidity. Alright, so we've established wide some that the Angara have never attacked a ship on their own. But now that we have the location, how come we don't mount a massive attack on our own? Remember, the Ket represent a threat to every race in the Helios cluster. Taking out the flagship of their alleged leader would be a key blow to their efforts in Andromeda, and we happen to have the exact location of his ship. Why not mount a massive attack on this flagship? We could even get the Angara to join in. And don't tell me that the Tempest doesn't have any weapons, which is stupid by the way, because our original plan is to infiltrate the ship despite the fact that we have no weapons. The fact that this was our default option suggests that we are okay to attacking a large vessel without ship-to-ship weapons. So let's just rally up all the exiles on Kadara with a few hundred shuttles, some Angara and all their shuttles, our strike teams, and maybe even one of our arcs, and just attack the ship with everything we've got. It's also important to remember that we had no idea the Solarian Arc was currently being held by the Archon, so we should have no reason to hold back. But instead of taking any of these smart options, we decide for some reason the location to Meridian is more important than wiping out the genocidal leader of the Ket and the flagship in which all their operations are coordinated out of. Instead, we plan to board the ship utilizing Tempest's stealth drive to remain unnoticed. Oh God. Do I need to explain why this too is idiotic? I'll be brief. We, as the Milky Way species, have no idea as to the technological level of the Ket. Therefore, the stealth drive of the Tempest shouldn't have been relied on because for all we know, the Ket have means of detecting a ship trapping its heat signature. Also, they happen to have hundreds of windows they can look out from. Alright, that's enough analyzing the stupidity of the premise of infiltrating the Archon ship. Let's finally look at the actual mission. We board the ship, discover the Solarians are being held by the Ket, and attempt to find the Solarian Pathfinder who's been hidden away. We revive them, and we agree to help them free the Solarian Ark and escape while also grabbing the Meridian Beacon. The combat and level design here are okay, and we learn a bit more about the Ket's selection methods for exaltation via auto-logs. Eventually we run into the Archon who traps us in a force field but doesn't kill us, instead extracting a blunt sample from us or maybe injecting us with something, it's unclear. Afterwards he continues to not kill us and just leaves us trapped there. I'll let this part slide because it appears this was all part of a trap set by the Archon so we could follow us to Meridian after we activated it. So we fight through the Morket, reach the Archon's office, and grab the Meridian Beacon, before fighting an exalted Krogan. On our way out from escaping the Archon ship, we get a message from the Solarian Pathfinder requesting help freeing some of their people. Meanwhile, Drac decides at this time to inform us missing Krogan scouts are also here somehow and need our help. Who are these Krogan scouts? When did they go missing? I don't remember him ever telling me about them, but then again maybe I wasn't paying attention. Once again we are presented with a false moral choice. Saving the Solarian Pathfinder and the Solarians in general is clearly the only correct choice here. Why would we sacrifice their lives to save some nameless Krogan scouts? Scouts, by their very definition, are expendable. You think Drac, from a warrior race like the Krogans, would be happy to have his scouts holding off the enemy to their death in a glorious battle. But no, for some reason he gets upset when you make the obvious right call. Whatever. In the end, we all managed to escape and free the Solarian Ark in the process. Hooray! Too bad the Archon ship is still intact. Also, you'd think the first thing we do after being stabbed in the neck with an unknown substance is get a complete body scan by Dr. Lexi to determine what, if anything, the Archon may have injected into our system. But nope. Ryder doesn't really seem to care that much, and Dr. Lexi apparently isn't too bothered to do a deep enough scan of our system. Oh well, I'm sure whatever the Archon did to us won't come up again. Oh, wait.
What's going on?
Part 8. Why am I still talking about this game? Nexus nonsense. After the unnecessarily risky assault on the Archon ship, we return to the Nexus with the Meridian data and the Solarian Ark. It's at this point the Nexus leadership convenes to decide what to do with this new data regarding Meridian. Ryder naturally wants to head straight to Meridian to activate whatever is there, as they believe it will fix all the other terraforming vaults connected to the station, even though the vaults we've already activated seem to be doing their job at terraforming their planets already. But let's just go with it. The Nexus leadership, on the other hand, are much more hesitant to invest all of their resources on an attack on Meridian to activate an ancient alien device they know nothing about and aren't entirely sure what it will do. Yet, Ryder persists and manages to strike a deal with the other Pathfinders they've already found at this point. In a situation reminiscent to Mass Effect 1, they agree to defy the Council, the Nexus, and go straight to Meridian. They'll accomplish this by using Ghost Storm technology they've suddenly pulled out of their ass to confuse the Ket and draw them away from Meridian, allowing Ryder access to the station and to activate it. Again, we see the game trying to replicate a moment from the series past and once again, failing. Let me explain. Going against the initiative is billed as something dangerous. As Ryder puts it, it means going against the initiative. We're alone here. But unlike defying the Council in Mass Effect 1, going against the Nexus means absolutely nothing in Andromeda. The Council in Mass Effect 1 controlled all of civilized Council space. By defying the Council, the player was risking their Spectre status being stripped, their career, their freedom, and possibly their life. Remember, the first act of the game is attempting to build enough of a case to get Saren stripped of his Spectre rank and marked as a criminal by the Council. Thus, defying the Council's explicit orders is something that has real consequences in that world and to the player. It even affects secondary characters like Captain Anderson, who chooses to aid the player. But in Andromeda, the Nexus has zero power. They don't control any galactic space. They have no army. They have no real laws, no supplies. They are nothing more than a name. And we've already seen a large group of individuals break off from the Nexus and thrive on their own. As a result, the threat of defying the will of the Nexus leadership is meaningless. They have no power to stop us. In fact, it is a Nexus that has been relying on the Pathfinder for the majority of the game. Once again, we are presented with another situation that is supposed to be dramatic and ethically questionable, but simply falls apart under any close inspection. In any case, the Pathfinder lifts off from the Nexus in the Tempest because no one in the Nexus thought it would be a good idea to impound our ship to keep us from doing exactly what we planned to do, and we race off to Meridian. Once we arrive at the alien station, we battle through waves of Remnant and Ket while pondering what exactly happened to the station. Scourge energy is everywhere, and the station shows signs of damage from long before the Ket's arrival. Eventually, we enter the heart of the facility, where we discover more mystery and questions before us. Part 9. Mystery, 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 mystery. So the first thing we learn in this mysterious station is that the Angara were likely created by the Remnant builders. We observe hundreds of pods containing inactive Angara, the implication being that possibly the Angara were carefully created by the builders for some purpose. Additionally, we learn that the Remnant builders were engaged in a war with some other race called the Jardan, and that the Scourge came about as a result of this war, though it's unclear which side deployed the weapon. The likely bet is the Jardan, since the Scourge is attracted to Remnant technology. We also learn that Meridian is not in fact the station we are standing on. Instead, it is only a piece that was broken off to keep the location of the actual Meridian safe, which is the shape of a small moon and the true heart of the Remnant network. So I think this is a good enough point to stop and talk about the other massive problem with Andromeda's story, the over-reliance on mystery. You see, every good story usually has some element of mystery to them. A little bit of mystery keeps the audience engaged. It gets them to ask questions about the fiction world and make their own guesses as to how everything will play out. However, too much mystery can also be a bad thing, bogging down your story and leaving your audience confused and irritated, especially when you leave most of your mysteries unsolved. The human brain is a curious thing, but at the end of the day, it wants answers to the questions it discovers. A question without an answer leaves us feeling incomplete and uneasy. Now, I don't think I need to really break this down much further. This is the exact same problem that bogged down shows like Lost, or really any movie or TV series J.J. Abrams or David Lindelof has been part of. Lost was all about the mystery with no actual payoff. By the end, audience members could tell the writers never had any answers to the mysteries they threw out. They were just making things up as they went along. It's also one of the many reasons Prometheus turned out to be such a shit movie.
Was the black goo different than the sparkly green goo? Was the black goo always intended for use as a weapon, or was it just weird alien cum? Why did Ridley Scott let his 12-year-old son do the makeup for Wayland?
Oh god, what's going on? In the original Mass Effect, mystery was handled perfectly throughout the whole series until the very end of Mass Effect 3, which screwed everything up. But just looking back at the first game, we see how well the game introduces just enough mystery to get us hooked, while also successfully solving the majority of these mysteries by the end of the game. The first real mystery in Mass Effect 1 surrounds the Protheans' beacon. We get sucked in by it and blasted with some sort of vision. Of course, Shepard thinks it has to be some attack by synthetics wiping out organics. Shepard thinks it's all part of some ploy by Saren to wipe out humans. Eventually, we learn that Saren is after something called the Conduit to bring back something called the Reapers. Now we got three mysteries. What was the beacon vision? What is the Conduit? And what are the Reapers? Halfway through the game, we learn that the Reapers are actually an ancient race of sentient machines that have been secretly wiping out advanced intelligent life in the galaxy every 50,000 years. We also learn that the beacon was a warning sent out by the Protheans detailing their war against the Reapers. That's two mysteries solved with one mystery added in, which is why the Reapers continue this cycle. By the end, we pretty much learn everything there is to know. We learn that the Conduit is a backdoor into the Citadel, that the Citadel is an inactive mass relay. We learn about how the Protheans fell to the Reapers and everything else. The only mystery remaining at the end of the game is why the Reapers do what they do. But this isn't exactly a pressing matter or needed information to stop then. Instead, it served as some dangling fruit for a sequel. This is fine. A little unsolved mystery left for future titles is okay, so long as the majority of the player's questions are solved by the end of your current story. Now let's take a look at Andromeda. Nearly every aspect of Andromeda's story is built upon mystery. Mystery which are mostly left unsolved by the end. In fact, Andromeda can be compared to Lost in that instead of solving mysteries it's already introduced to the player, it seeks to throw out even more mysteries to the player as the game goes on, possibly in an attempt to make us forget our earlier questions. We arrive in an alien galaxy, and the first world we visit is completely unlike our initial scans. We see weird alien architecture, meet a hostile alien race, and turn on one of the weird alien devices that fixes the atmosphere. At the end of our first mission, we want to know who were these remnant builders, what is the purpose of these vaults, what is a Scourge, why are the worlds these vaults unscrewed up that they need fixing, who are the Ket, what do they want, how do they function, i.e. how do they govern themselves, why is the Archon so obsessed with the Remnant, and so on. Yet at the end of the game, pretty much none of these questions are answered. Instead, we just get more questions. Who are the Jardaan? Why did they fight the Remnant Builders? What was the purpose of the Scourge? Why did the Remnant Builders create the Angara? What was the purpose of Meridian? Why was part of it hidden? Where did the Remnant or Jardaan go? Why has the Archon been allowed to waste so much time in Helios chasing after Remnant instead of exalting the Cluster as he had been originally tasked with? And on and on and on. You get the point. It's hard to even classify Andromeda as a complete story, as the player's knowledge of the events and the game's world is almost identical at the start of the game as it is at the end of the game. Again, at the end of Mass Effect 1, the player knew pretty much everything except why the Reapers did what they did. At the end of Andromeda, the player can't even answer what the purpose of the alien vaults were that they've been turning on all game, or even who the Remnant Builders were. Part 10. Is it over yet? Almost. We're finally nearing the end of this disaster of a main plot. Ryder activates the Meridian Station, only to learn that the landing on the station was part of an elaborate trap by the Archon to learn the real location of Meridian and activate it for himself. He proceeds to sever our connection to Sam and begin an attack on Nexus to take control of our brother's Sam implant so he can gain access to Meridian. After some false tension that happens purely through cutscene, we manage to regain our connection to Sam and have to plot our way through to follow Archon to Meridian and end him once and for all. Ryder then decides to use their connection with Sam to take control of the remnant ships inside Meridian Station and mount an all-out assault on Meridian with as many allies as they have at their side. The actual driving sequence once we get to Meridian isn't actually bad, as the game attempts to weave our choices throughout the game into this final battle. Eventually, we make it inside the station where we fight waves and waves of enemies as the Archon attempts to gain access to Meridian, which we are told is really bad, even though it's never established why this will be bad. I mean, the Archon tells us he'll use Meridian to get all the races in the cluster to submit or be wiped out, though it isn't exactly clear how he will manage to wipe everyone out. Also, wouldn't wiping them out be contrary to his goals? I thought his job was to exalt the cluster. Fuck it. I guess the Archon is just crazy. Crazy people don't need to justify their actions, though it's a far cry from, say, a sympathetic villain like Saren. Of course, our twin manages to slow them down and direct us to a bunch of panels that will overload the Archon's connection to Meridian. Thus we fight more waves while fighting the Archon, and I say fight the Archon in quotes, as we don't ever get to actually fight him, but just a recycled use of those remnant dragon things. A villain so ineffective they can't even get their own unique boss fight. Anyway, we overload all the panels, which kills the Archon somehow. Afterwards we all celebrate. We've managed to kill the Archon and his flagship, and secure Meridian for the rest of the cluster. Also, somehow this makes plant life to start to grow again on all the worlds we've already visited, despite the fact that we already activated terraforming vaults on those worlds already. Fast forward some weeks, and everyone is happy with what Ryder managed to accomplish, so much so that they want to ask our input on who should be the representative for the races in the Helios cluster. Fucking hell, must this game copy everything from Mass Effect 1? Yep. Once again, this final choice isn't anywhere near as compelling as the one at the end of Mass Effect 1 between Anderson and Edina. In fact, it makes no sense. And that's not to say that the ending choice in Mass Effect 1 was all that hard to make either. I mean, really, who's the asshole that chose Edina? After this stupid decision, which I'll explain why it's so stupid in my next video where we get into the side quests, we get 2 sequel-baited sequences before the credit finally rolls. One just before we take off from our ship, telling us that somehow the Quarians got their own arcs that was also filled with all the other non-council species members that somehow made it to Andromeda. Because shit, why shouldn't this new galaxy have all the exact same races as the old galaxy? This is so creative and fresh, right? Then we get another short sequel-baited sequence showing what looks like Primus ominously staring at Meridian before we're leaving. Ooh, scary. And finally, that's it. The end to one of the worst told stories in BioWare's history. A story that fails on nearly every level, from characters, to world building, to plot. Unfortunately, we're just getting started. This video is so fucking long enough as it is, and I still haven't even talked about the failures of the side missions, the loyalty missions, the gameplay, the quest design, or even the Lackluster soundtrack. All of which I'll likely save for one last video before finally putting this game to rest. So, I hope you enjoyed this part of my video. Stay tuned for my next one, which is coming at, well, some point. Again, if you liked the video, maybe like it below, or comment in the comment section below to let me know what I could improve on, your thoughts, or anything else. Peace.
If we can possibly avoid firing on it, then I would hope
Aren't you going to kill it?
You think like, hey, that's crazy. This thing's sucking the life off of planets. We should just shoot it.
I would argue that the crystalline entity has as much right to be here as we do.
Except I am gonna fuck your shit up. How's that for great?
Oh, God! No! God, please, no! No! No!